Right, well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for this webinar. My name is Bishop Richard Moth. I'm the Bishop of Arundel and Brighton, and also the Chair of Governors at St Mary's University, which is a wonderful post to hold in a very exciting and inspiring community. It's extraordinary to think that it's 10 years now since Pope Benedict came to this country and visited St Mary's University. And it's to mark the 10th anniversary of his visit that today, this very special day on education has been held by the university, with many people joining in a number of events during the day. And we're delighted this evening to welcome so many to this webinar. And I'd like to begin by welcoming very specially our speakers. I'm going to introduce all four of them, our panelists, and then each panelist will then speak for about 8 minutes. So just a warning to the panelists, I'll try and be good, but if you get too carried away, I'll jump up and down or something so that you know it's time to draw to a close. So to begin then, we welcome Dame Rachel de Souza. Rachel is Chief Executive of the Inspiration Trust, which is a trust of a number of schools in Norfolk. It's given her life to education, and this was recognised by her appointment as a Dame in 2014. Is also the founder of the Parents and Teachers for Excellence campaign group, and trustee of the Ambition Institute. So, Rachel, we look forward very much to hearing from you in just a few moments. Paul Barber joins us this evening. Paul is a barrister. He read law at Jesus College, Cambridge, called to the bar, Middle Temple in 1992. And not only is he a common lawyer, but also a canon lawyer, having degrees in canon law from London and Leuven. Been engaged in education policy and legislation for many years now, and is a fellow and indeed founding council member of the Chartered College of Teaching. He'll be known to many people as the one responsible for the Catholic Education Service for the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, but his reach goes broader. He sits on the Legal Affairs Commission of the Episcopal Conference of the United Kingdom and the Legal Advisors Group for the Episcopal Conferences of Europe. So someone with a very great experience in education and in the law over many years. Our third panellist this evening is Anthony Mclaren. Anthony is the Vice-Chancellor at St Mary's University, having arrived to begin a new role at the university just as we all went into lockdown earlier in the year. So he's had quite an interesting beginning to his time with us at St Mary's. Before that, he worked in Australia, where he was CEO of the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency. And before that was the Chief Executive of the QAA here in the UK. Anthony is also a member of the board of the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education. And so his many years of experience bring together both the academic world and also the governance and oversight of the academic world. So a very fascinating portfolio that he now brings to St Mary's University, and we're very delighted to have you in the university now, Anthony, and very pleased that you can be with us today. And our fourth panellist, Bettina Sandvall-Smith, has been involved in religious education and senior leadership in Catholic education now for 25 years, and is currently assistant head teacher at the Bishop Challoner Catholic Foundation of Schools in the East End of London, with a particular responsibility as head of Catholic Life. Bettina has a passion for Catholic education for all, and exploring the ways in which Catholic education serves not only the Catholic community, but also the wider community. This and other themes that will be explored this evening fit very, very well for the 10th anniversary of Pope Benedict's visit. I have a particular memory myself of the event in Westminster Hall when Pope Benedict spoke of the outreach into the court of the Gentiles, into the wider world. And I'm sure that's something that we'll be looking at more closely this evening. So I'm going to turn to the first of our panelists, Rachel. And Rachel, you have 8 minutes. But just before I do that, could I just remind everybody here that this event this evening is being recorded and will be available to view again on the St Mary's website after the event is over. So, Rachel, thank you, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much. So, my Lord Bishop, Vice-Chancellor, ladies, gentlemen, students and staff of St Mary's and guests, it is a great pleasure to be here with you, sadly remotely and not bodily today, but my heart, mind and spirit are fully with you as we remember the visit of Pope Benedict to St Mary's in 2010. Cobham Island is not a glamorous place. A marshy piece of land on the edges of Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. Even the area's most ardent residents would not claim it as Eden. In fact, together with other areas of the town, it ranks in some of the most deprived wards in the country. But for me, it's my missionary destination. I was fortunate enough to have benefited from a Catholic education in England right up to the age of 21, studying for my first degree at Heathrock College, formerly in the University of London in the 1980s. This is one of the reasons, just one, that I'm passionate that St Mary's remains a beacon Catholic university for our country, as envisaged by St John Henry Newman. My time at Heathrock College was one where Jesuits were engaged in radical social justice work in South Africa and South America, eager to pursue equality and equity in far-flung corners of the world. That is good and righteous work, but my career has taken me on a different path, tackling problems closer to home that can seem no less intractable. The education charity I'm so privileged to run, the Inspiration Trust, now stretches over 14 schools, including that tiny little Cobham Primary Academy on the edge of those wetlands. For many of our children, our schools are often the beacon that my teachers and professors were for me. My family upbringing in a working class family in Scunthorpe was not at all that different to theirs. There was no tradition of study, nor of university, nor of radical aspiration. That was changed by a very inspiring group of presentation sisters, and I can't go without mentioning Sister Louie and Sister Christina, who taught me religious education at our local Catholic high school. They introduced me to the basics of classical Greek, to philosophy of religion, to ethics, to biblical studies. It opened my eyes, and it seemed only natural to continue on that path and study philosophy and theology at Heathrock, even if London seemed as far away to me then as it does now to some of our Year 5 and Year 6 pupils in Cobham. I was lucky enough to be tutored by great lecturers like the ethicist and Aquinas scholar Father Jerry Hughes, SJ, the oratorian Father Richard Price, who taught us patristics, Father John Coventry, who taught us Greek, and more. They really taught me how to think, how to appreciate the value of a rigorous education, and this showed me the power of philosophy, of literature, of culture, and of ideas. I was also lucky enough to meet my husband, Chris, a fellow Heathrock student. So for giving me both my career and my family, I have an awful lot to be grateful to Catholic education for. After graduating, I worked in comprehensives in Oxford and the East End of London at a sixth form in Luton, and then became a founding principal of one of Prime Minister Tony Blair's early sponsored academies, Barnfield West Academy. The drive and determination I knew from St Ignatius Loyola proved invaluable here. Stuck in the bottom 100 schools in the country for many years and with poor grades and low aspirations, it took a lot of arm twisting, a lot of storming heaven and a lot of hard work to secure the turnaround that those children deserved, and I knew the children, all children, are capable of. Within 2 years, the number of pupils getting the headline GCSE grades had more than tripled. We were the most improved school in the country. There were different challenges in my next headship in Norfolk. But again, we persevered and we moved from special measures to outstanding in 3 years. In Norfolk, I realised just how central the role of head teacher and school is to a community. I have searing memories of standing with a mother as she buried her son, one of our pupils who had died in an accident. My respect for head teachers' leadership in their communities is immense, especially now in these strange times. Over these last few months, I've seen our head teachers supply food banks, support distressed families and children, deliver laptops and dongles and internet, create great online learning programs. We at Inspiration contributed to the filmed English and history lessons on the wonderful Oak National Academy, a free online school created in days over Easter by one of my head teachers, David Thomas, and DFE's Matt Hood in response to COVID, with lessons now accessed by millions. They managed to get Justin Welby to give an online assembly. I have tasked them with getting one from Pope Francis, and we definitely want one from Bishop Moth. In 2013, I founded the Inspiration Trust with Lord Agnew, my chairman. It's a multi-academy trust. We continue to battle hard to improve schools and the life chances of all our pupils, leading us to being rated as the best performing schools group in the country for progress to GCSE at least once. We want it every year. We're particularly passionate that disadvantaged communities and children benefit from an excellent education. As a trust of 14 school, we share our resources. I have a £46 million annual turnover, 1,000 staff, 7,500 pupils. My team of principals and I share everything, all the money in one pot. This allows us to support our smaller primaries, that little primary on the coast I talked about. We've invested in and developed a superb knowledge-rich core curriculum. We have a Cpd program for our staff, which is second to none, draws on national and international experts. Tom Bennett on behaviour, Daisy Christodoulou on assessment, Edie Hirsch on cultural capital, who've all visited and trained us, to name a few. We have a superb central team that build and prepare our buildings, do our HR, finance, procurement. These are agile experts that support us so we can focus on education. When our data showed us fixed term exclusions were too high, in part because of our high behaviour expectations, rightly high, we came together, pooled resources. Now we're hiring our own educational psychologist, our own professional support specialists, and developing new provision with a goal of zero exclusions. By joining together, we've achieved so much more. I'm immensely proud of what my colleagues and our young people are achieving, with some of the best results for progress in the country and some astounding growth in schools that seemed academically barren for many years. That marshy land where I stand regularly in Cobham may not be glamorous, but we all come from the soil and we all have the potential for greatness through service. My Catholic education taught me that, and I will be forever grateful.
Rachel, thank you so much for your very helpful and words, and covered a lot of ground in a short space. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to Paul Barber, and so that he can present to us.
Thank you, my lord. And it's great to be here on the 10th anniversary of Pope Benedict's visit, which I remember so well from attending 10 years ago as a mere diocesan director of education in those days. I'm going to talk about the legacy that we have inherited of Catholic education, and a little bit about the challenges. And I'm going to approach that from, as I usually do, I hope, from a very optimistic point of view. So this wonderful legacy that we are now the custodians of in this country is a fabulous part of our nation's history and our world's history. The Catholic Church has been providing education in this country for the people of this country since at least the 6th century. But our modern phase really starts in the 19th with the introduction of grants for schools, and it was largely the churches that took up this gauntlet from 1833. Our negotiations to get an acceptable settlement didn't come to fruition until 1847, so the first state-funded Catholic schools date from then. In those days, the Catholic Church had next to nothing in terms of infrastructure or money. But our bishops in 1852 said that the priority for the church in this country was the education of the poor, and that people were to build schools first and churches later. And that vision set the direction and the pastoral policy, which has continued ever since. And in 1870, 150 years ago, the Elementary Education Act brought the state in as partners with the churches to join us in that endeavour, to fill the gaps where there weren't enough church schools. Our essential infrastructure, our parishes and our primary schools, were really built up in that 50-year period with the pennies of the poor. And that introduction of universal and later free and compulsory elementary education completed the partnership. The 20th century saw the expansion of secondary education to become universal, and the 1944 Education Act, and the churches were very much part of that. And again, in partnership with the state, we made huge strides in adding to our infrastructure. So that put in place the legacy that we have today. We have over 2,100 schools across the country. We provide 10% of the education system of this country. We're the second largest provider of primary schools and the largest provider of secondary schools. And a third, with the Church of England, a third of all schools in the country are church schools. Our Catholic schools are the most diverse in the country. They are the most diverse ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and socio-economically. And true to the mission that our bishops set out in the 1850s, they still take much higher proportions of children from the poorest areas in the country than any other type of school. And not only that, the evidence has shown that the children that come from the most disadvantaged backgrounds do better in our schools than in any other type of school. Now, that's about the Catholic education in this country, and it is, of course, in a wider context. We are a universal church, and last year I was very privileged to be able to be elected on behalf of England and Wales as president of the International Office of Catholic Education. And this worldwide family in many ways mirrors the kind of infrastructure we have here. There are over 62.5 million pupils in Catholic schools across the world in over 210,000 schools. There's been a slow decline in parts of the Western world in Catholic education in terms of numbers, not including this country, I'm glad to say. But in the poorest parts of the world, it's been going up exponentially. In Africa, there's been a huge rise. And the research has shown that Catholic schools are twice as good as at reaching the very poorest than any other type of school. And so, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there are 5.5 million pupils in Catholic education. So that's the context. And what then is are the opportunities and the challenges for us? Well, I think that we are as well placed as we've ever been to deliver high quality, authentic Catholic education in this country. We have our challenges, of course, and one of the biggest challenges we have, which I'll come on to, is the need to have a pool of committed, well-formed Catholic adults to run and lead our schools. And that is, without doubt, our biggest challenge, given the size of our infrastructure. And our successful schools. But if you look at the opportunities, I think they're myriad. Ofsted is now asking schools, essentially, what is your curriculum intent and how does your curriculum deliver that intent? So if we think of a Catholic curriculum, if we think of Newman's inspiration, a curriculum that can answer his question about the individual vocation of every single pupil in our schools, we are essentially being handed on a plate the opportunity to develop and articulate that and put it into practice. We do have that challenge of our leadership. where are we going to find the future leaders? Our infrastructure was built up with a huge amount of resource from religious orders. And what we've seen in recent decades is the change from schools run by religious orders, and then schools run by those who were taught and formed by religious orders. And now we have a leadership that largely was not taught and formed by religious orders, and we're looking to the future. That means we need to think about doing things differently. And we've got a number of opportunities, one of which, of course, is the different structures that are available. It's not the same everywhere. Different parts of the country are different. But the opportunities for bringing together our schools in multi-academy trusts is something that many dioceses have taken on board and worked with a strategic plan to bring that about. And that the very interesting thing is, in our recent months, those dioceses that have done that and have a smallish number of large multi-academy trusts have found that they have swung into action and worked extremely well and extremely effectively during the present difficulties over the last few months. And it also gives an opportunity to have an infrastructure that allows a perhaps smaller number of committed, well-formed Catholics to run our schools in the future. So I think we are well placed to take that future in our own hands, to respect the legacy that we have inherited and to make the most of it in the future. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Let's move now to Anthony Mclaren.
Thank you, Bishop Richard. Good evening, everybody. It's a great privilege to be here as Vice-Chancellor of St Mary's University and to be part of this celebration of the visit of Pope Benedict. Thank you, Annalisa, and your colleagues for all the hard work that's gone into making today happen. I was here 10 years ago as chair of a Catholic and Anglican academy school in Cheltenham, and greetings to anyone from All Saints Academy who's listening tonight. To hear Pope Benedict say to an audience of over 4,000, the task of the teacher is not simply to input information or to provide training in skills intended to deliver some economic benefit to society. Education is not and never must be considered purely utilitarian. It's about forming the human person, equipping him or her to live life to the full. In short, it is about imparting wisdom. Not a bad mission statement, that, and one that inevitably reminds any Catholic educator of the words of John Henry Newman, whom Pope Benedict beatified in that visit to England 10 years ago. As we're reminded in the introduction to St Mary University's Vision 2025, Newman's vision was one of interdisciplinary education, virtues and values, with an emphasis on the formation of each individual. Pope Benedict was journeying to the UK and through London, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Birmingham. Newman was on a journey too. Beatified during that visit, he's now attained sainthood. And St Mary's, then a university college, would 4 years later become St Mary's University, the culmination of a journey towards full university status as one of England's Catholic universities. But these ideals, expressed by Pope Benedict and St John Henry Newman, so important to the life of a Catholic university and to the idea of a Catholic university, exist now, of course, in a context of full cost fees, research assessment, financial pressures, high expectations of employability and graduate premiums in salaries, and, at least in England, an environment in which the default position is secular, and there is sometimes the assumption that a distinct confessional or faith identity will lead to division and exclusion. So, in that context, what should characterize the role of a Catholic university in 2020, 2025 and beyond? And what might it offer both the Catholic community and the wider society of which we are, in this country at least, a relatively small part numerically? I want to offer three key things. First, a contribution to genuine diversity in the higher education system. Second, service to a changing church. And third, stepping into what Bishop Richard has already referred to and what Pope Benedict termed the Courtyard of the Gentiles, the public square, the place where the church meets those of other faiths and none. So first of all, genuine diversity in the HE system. I spent, as you've heard, the last 5 years working in Australia, in the higher education system there, in the wonderful and currently very locked down city of Melbourne. While I was there, Glyn Davis, who's recently stepped down as VC of the University of Melbourne, published with Echoes of Newman a book called The Australian Idea of a University. In it, he describes the evolution of the Australian model of a university, a model civic, urban, professionally oriented, research active, largely non-residential, so attractive and compelling that now, he argues, there aren't really 40 universities in Australia, but one university with 40 campuses. Such homogenizing pressures are present here too, as universities chase the same funding sources, strive to recruit ever larger numbers of international students, and seek to ensure that they can tick all the boxes required by government and its regulatory agencies. Can diversity survive? Surely, for a healthy higher education ecosystem, it should not only survive but flourish. After all, what's the real value of student choice if the choice on offer is a series of universities that differ substantially only in their location? The Catholic University will offer genuine diversity of choice to the potential student, in its subject mix perhaps, in where it chooses to focus its research, in a range of partnerships which, given the truly global presence of the Church and its institutions, may look very different to the patterns of engagement found elsewhere. In its values and commitment to a holistic view of knowledge and of the integrity and dignity of each member of its community. In the opportunities offered for the integration of learning and community action and spirituality. Second key area, service to a changing church. This is a critical role for a Catholic university, and as the church changes, so will the nature of that service. But let me be clear that I don't mean that the only purpose of Catholic higher education is to serve the church, which is sometimes how the Catholic mission can be misrepresented. However, as St. John Paul II reminds us in his apostolic constitution on Catholic universities, every Catholic university, without ceasing to be a university, has a relationship to the church that is essential to its institutional identity. So how might this express itself? Here at St. Mary's, it has, since our foundation, expressed itself through the training of teachers for Catholic and, of course, other schools. And the huge numbers of PGCE students who've joined us this September, while undoubtedly causing Annalise and her colleagues some headaches, have reminded us again of just how vital that aspect of our service is. In our ever-strengthening theology, and not only for our lay students in the Institute, but for the seminarians we've welcomed to the Pontifical Mater Ecclesiae College. In research centres like the Aquinas Centre, the Benedict XVI Centre, the Centre for Research and Development in Catholic Education, providing intellectual resources for the clergy, the teacher, and the committed lay people trying to live out their vocation in the world of work. And the future, our response to the pandemic has reminded us, if we needed reminding, and proved to us, if we doubted it, that we can deliver remotely, not only content, but a genuinely enriching teaching and learning experience. And the church has found, even when church doors were closed, that thousands were connecting online to stream masses and discussion groups. So Catholic HE of the future, and indeed the church of the future, will continue to reach out to the communities unbound by location, but just as keen to access the full spectrum of learning, from short courses to degrees to ecclesiastical qualifications, that a Catholic university like ours can offer. And this offers the church both an opportunity and, I think, a challenge. The opportunity to meet a wide range of educational and professional updating needs for members, both clerical and lay, and the challenge to fully include higher education and Catholic universities in her vision of education in the way which, as we've heard from Paul, she so brilliantly included and nurtured primary and secondary education and Catholic schools. Finally, the Courtyard of the Gentiles, that third key strand, the ways in which Catholic higher education could be part of that dialogue with those in our society who hold other beliefs or no belief, or who are searching for meaning. The Courtyard of the Gentiles was that very expressive image used by Pope Benedict to refer to the wider public square in which we meet others in our pluralistic, diverse society. And it's been adopted to cover a wide range of initiatives, particularly in the world of culture and public engagement, the space where universities feel, or certainly should feel, particularly at home, with expertise to contribute. Catholic universities navigate this space, this courtyard, all the time. Unlike many Catholic schools, we are unlikely, in this country at least, to be places where anything like the majority of our students will be Catholic. So the dialogue necessary to establish a shared language for values and for meaning is a constant for us, and it extends beyond the boundaries of the campus itself. How should we serve our local communities? A very live discussion for St Mary's right now as we work with our borough on the response to COVID. How do we serve the wider communities of London? Students certainly, but also the highly specialised and professional communities of, for example, the City of London, a dialogue so positively carried forward by Ruth Kelly in her time here as PVC. How might we most effectively join in the debates about the great ethical issues of our time, as is being done by our Centre for Bioethics and Emerging Technologies, or our Centres for Law and Culture, or the study of modern slavery? This courtyard, this space, is one with which the Church must engage, and the Catholic University will often be the source of the resources that enable that engagement to happen. So genuine diversity, service to a changing Church, and engagement in a public realm which may be indifferent or even hostile, key tasks and challenges for Catholic higher education.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed for introducing a very wide-ranging really presentation there on our tertiary education. We turn now then to Bettina for her presentation, and Bettina, you might need to just turn your speaker on. Oh, that's it. Wonderful.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Here I am. Thank you, Bishop Richard, and a very good evening to all in the audience this evening. My task in the next 8 minutes is to share my perspective on the future of religious education in Catholic school communities. In doing so, I believe it is relevant to briefly look at the importance, purpose of RE in Catholic schools. I'm now going to share my screens with you. Give me 1 second. Yep, there we are. Yep. Share screens. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's it. I think that would be it. We're reminded by Pope John Paul II that RE is the core of the core curriculum within our schools. Having RE at the core of the curriculum in Catholic schools helps our leaders to fulfill the mission of our schools, to educate the whole human person, as you heard earlier. Tonight, colleagues, I'd like us to remember that religious education is not simply concerned with intellectual knowledge, but also includes emotional and affective learning. The RECDs underpins and forms the basis of RE curriculums in Catholic schools. They remind us of the deprivation that our students would experience in their formation and personal development without the presence of the subject in the curriculum. And again, the purpose of imparting RE in our schools is clearly echoed in the RECDs. This is an awesome responsibility for leaders and teachers of Catholic education, as it substantially helps our teachers to pass on the faith. 10 years ago today, Pope Benedict reminded us of making saints of the students in our care. This I believe to be the tenet of delivering RE in our schools. However, I believe that the future of RE, with its purpose and importance, its tenets, are in crisis in our school communities. not there, now there's an umbrella of issues that contribute to a potential crisis. But within the confines of my time, I will address the following 3 areas. So if we look at recruitment of RE teachers, which is key area 1 for me, it is clear that there are schools, that our schools are facing a supply and demand issue in relation to the shortfall of RE teachers. If we are unable to train, the question is, who will be leading the teaching of RE and passing on the faith to tomorrow's generations? In 2010, Pope Benedict reminded us that we form new generations, not only in the knowledge of the faith, but every aspect of what it means to live as mature and responsible citizens in today's world. As you know, our students aren't just objects. They're young people created in God's image. Each one of them unique and educable. As RE practitioners and leaders of Catholic education, we have a twofold role if the future of this subject is to continue and to have a place in the curriculum. One of these roles will be to continue to professionally develop ourselves. The second I see is in engaging in educational research and curriculum planning, which will inform our practice and support the theological literacy we wish to develop in our students. The second of my key areas is the curriculum. The curriculum offer that is there for our students at present. It must be of awe and wonder. It must be engaging. It must be challenging. It must animate and shape the young people in our care. The passion of our delivery must be one of enthusiasm, an enthusiasm that should be infectious amongst our young people. However, it strikes me that our Key Stage 3 curriculum is becoming smaller and smaller, squeezed on the altar Key Stage 4 league tables. Our schools are not utilitarian, as you heard earlier. They are about forming the whole human person. The RE curriculum is an integral part of this formation. Now I'm going to look at a third of my key areas, and that's the future of the subject. In some of my school experience, I have seen a disconnection between GCSE, A-level, and degree pathways. When RE is no longer compulsory and competing against a variety of A-levels and vocational options, we know that it is often the case that our examination entries fall in numbers, even within Catholic schools. We also know that RE is not always viewed as valuable by some of our parents. It is also not in an EBAC. What will it lead to beyond religious vocations? Our current students are our future Catholic leaders. There is a need for us to attract leaders with a grounder in a wider theological vision, more than simply philosophy or ethical viewpoints. Colleagues, while I have cited these 3 areas of concern, there is one strong and consistent area of hope. Catholic families and families of other faith communities want their children to be educated in Catholic schools. The challenge for us as a profession, as a Catholic community, is to provide a passion for this subject and for our students that goes beyond the academic curriculum that they are made or required to do throughout the key stages. In closing, let us remember what this evening is about. 10 years ago today, Pope Benedict thanked the teaching profession for carrying the light of the gospel. I believe the future of RE encapsulated is in this responsibility, as the gospel is the living center of our school communities. Thank you.
Bettina, thank you very much indeed. We've heard some very fine presentations this evening, a lot of ground covered in short space of time, and I'm very grateful to all of our speakers for moving along so smoothly. If I could ask the four speakers now just to turn their screens on so that we can see folk, that would be wonderful. And we're going to come now to the part of the evening where we can address some questions. Now, could I ask those of you who would like to send questions in to type them into the Q&A box on your Zoom screens? I'll try and keep my eye on the chat screen as well, but it's much easier if you wouldn't mind using the Q&A box. Now, I think I've got something. So if I can just address the question there from David. Yes, I think Bettina, the PowerPoint will show on the broadcast of our evening, so you'll be able to access it that way, David. Now, do any of our participants this evening have a question for any of our panelists? If not, I'll start, just while you think of one. I'd like to address a question, please, if I may, to Paul. And you raised, towards the end of your presentation, some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that we're facing. Now, I personally would completely agree with you. I think we're in a very good place in Catholic education in this country right now. And I think the future is bright. Could I just ask you what you think are the major challenges that we're going to be facing in Catholic education over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes, I think that the major challenges we're going to face are twofold. Now, the Catholic Education Service was established by the bishops in 1847 to be the collective voice of the bishops to national governments and national agencies in terms of education policy nationally. And that's always been, in a sense, traditionally the focus of the Catholic national education infrastructure, in that it's been external looking, looking at the challenges that have always been there in different shapes and forms outside. So the external. And I think the external is not going away. I think we are, fortunately at the moment, we're in a pretty good place in terms of our relationship with the state. No system is perfect and there are always things we can moan about, but doing the international work that I do with my European colleagues and with my worldwide colleagues, we actually have got an extremely good settlement and system here. It has lots of very positive bits to it. But if you look at the external, I think that's one area of challenge, and it's the secular challenge. It's the pressure as our society becomes more and more secular and secularist. That is the biggest challenge that we will face in the years to come. There are groups who do not want our schools to exist or anything like them, and they are always seeking new ways to challenge us. Now, at the moment, they are on the outside, as it were, but there are those in Parliament, there are those in governments, there are those in politics who support that position. And I can't see that going away. If anything, it's going to grow. So I think that that's one aspect. I think that's the biggest aspect on the external front. I mentioned earlier, though, that there's another side to it, which is internal. As I say, we've been always looking at the threats from outside, but we potentially could be victims of our own success. We've grown a fabulous infrastructure, which is huge and does a fabulous job, and the professionals in it make it what it is. But we are running 10% of the nation's education with a smaller and smaller number of well-formed, committed Catholics. And it could, if we don't do things well, we could end up either running 10% of the schools and it not being authentically Catholic, or unable to run that number of schools, unless we look at using structures differently to ensure that we can still run that number of schools as well as we currently do, and even better, but with a more systematic approach, which enables a smaller number of well-formed, committed Catholics to run that infrastructure in the future. And I think that we can't simply go on doing what we have done in the past in different circumstances and hoping it will replicate the same outcomes. We need to look at it structurally and get that embedded in a different way and be creative about that. And I think what we've seen recently is many of our dioceses doing that kind of work. And they are working with us collaboratively and with the universities in a venture called Formatio, which is looking at the formation of our next generations of Catholic teachers, leaders and governors.
Paul, thank you. The question has come in from Matthew, addressed to you, and it leads on from what you've just been saying. And the question is, do you think we need now a national strategy for improving the recruitment specifically of RE teachers? And when we've heard from you on that subject, I'd like to go to Bettina on that same theme.
Do you want me to start? Yes. Yeah.
It kind of leads on from what you've been saying, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we do, and I think that will sit within the wider work on teachers generally within Formatio, collaborating with dioceses and with the higher education institutions and our universities. And I think that we mustn't forget the local either. I think it's not either or, it's both and, because growing talent locally, schools growing their own, all of those kind of things have to be part of that as well.
Paul, thank you. Bettina, would you like to add anything to Paul's response there?
Not much more than what Paul has said. As one of the things that I did say earlier is, I think as a community, we've got to look to ourselves to some extent, because the DFE keeps, there's a shortfall annually, as we know. They're supposed to be training 650 to 700 teachers a year, but of course they continue not to meet that target. I think today there was an announcement that they have for last academic year, but we'll see. The thing is that there is a supply and demand issue, and the only thing that I can say in addition to what Paul has said is that for us as teachers within Catholic schools, we do a tremendous job at Key Stage 4 of bringing our students through. I mean, we have cohorts of 250 plus students each year who then does outstandingly well in their results of level 4s to level 9s. However, we're not seeing that being transformed into our sixth form classrooms. And if we're not having students coming through into the sixth form to do theology, to do ethics, to do philosophy, and going on to religion to study the subject, I think that's part of the issue. And so this is why I think that as a school community, as a Catholic community, we've got to continue to try as far as possible to grow our own.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bettina. We've a question here, which I'd like to bring to Anthony initially. To what extent could universities help in emphasising the importance of RE by doing more in this area as universities and working more closely with schools? Anthony, would you like to have a go at that one?
I would, and just from a couple of different angles, actually. I mean, certainly the possibility and the actuality of Catholic universities working closely with partner schools is already a reality and can be strengthened. And it's also reciprocal because, of course, one of the major problems we face as a provider of teacher training is the difficulty in finding placements for the, thank God, very, very many students who are coming through our doors in order to train as teachers. And Bishop Richard, you know the reality of that, and indeed you've been part of trying to find solutions to that problem. So I think that there is clearly the strengthening of those networks is really important. The intellectual resources for curriculum reform in RE, as Bettina's emphasised, but also in other subject areas, is also a key resource being developed within our universities. But I would also just like to say something from a slightly different direction, which is about recognising the challenges that I think Paul was touching on, and the role that universities can play there. Because I think, you know, we all know very well now, and research, not least by Stephen Bullivant at this university, has established very clearly massively changing patterns of Catholic commitment. So the idea now that, you know, regrettably, that attending a Catholic school will lead to young people who are very committed Catholics, we know that that's not the case. It is in some cases, but increasingly few. However, people are searching and discovering and committing to the church at all stages of their lives now, and I think we need to recognise this pattern now of a need for lifelong learning and lifelong formation, and that's something where I think for the church as a whole to think about education as a continuum. So of course the schools are important; they're always critical, and it's one of the great achievements of the Catholic community in this country, the system that's been built up. But it won't be enough, actually, by itself. There will need to be, and this can be offered at the tertiary level, at the higher education level, there'll need to be a response to the need that people now have at all different stages of their lives for an engagement, not only with learning, but with faith and with faith formation. And just one final point on this, I and some of my colleagues here at the university had a really good meeting the other day with our counterparts at the Institut Catholique de Paris. And they had a really interesting comment that they were making, which is that they're finding among their students an increasing number who not only are not committed Catholics when they join the university, but have no religious formation at all. I mean, they are absolutely secular or post-secular. But the interesting thing is that, as the rector of the ICP put it, neither have they been inoculated against faith, and actually their chaplaincy is booming because of the very large numbers of students who are searching and who are in a way unencumbered by a kind of prejudice against the church or the faith or religion, are able to and want to engage in dialogue around those sorts of issues. So again, you know, a critical role which typically people are going to engage with probably when they're in adulthood or close to adulthood, rather than when they're at a younger age.
Sure. Anthony, thank you very much. There's a question come in here for Rachel. And that's a question as to how you promote the teaching of RE in your particular academy, in the great number of schools that you have, and whether that's kind of at the core of things or on the edges. How do you approach what place does RE have in your academy?
Thanks, that's a great question. Lots of our schools, before we took them on, because they're academy schools, were failing schools, and lots of them didn't have a strong tradition of teaching RE. So one of the things we did was start by focusing, especially down in the primary schools, on a very, very structured core knowledge curriculum. And we started with the humanities first, and RE was absolutely central to that. We managed to get some funding from the government, SIF funding, and we put together an absolutely fantastic core knowledge curriculum at Key Stage 2 in the humanities and science with RE at the centre. So if you go to that little school in Cobham, those children will be able to, so they'll all have studied the Abrahamic religions. They will be able to talk to you absolutely clearly about key concepts such as incarnation, Eucharist, transubstantiation. That foundation then leads into a Key Stage 3 curriculum and on into GCSE. Now we're starting to see greater numbers coming through, and RE is in our 6th form, but I wanted to absolutely support Bettina's comment about we need to make sure that lower down in the schools, the teaching from 3 through to 11 through to 14 is as rigorous and as demanding. These children are absolutely capable of this and really fascinated. And frankly, our view is if the children don't have an excellent understanding of Christianity and Judaism particularly, we teach Christianity, Judaism, Islam first, those are the first things. They don't understand that, they're not going to understand history, geography, the rest of the world, you know, the whole. So it's essential to our curriculum offer. Now, my question back would be, I'm not working in the Catholic sector, but if I was, I would then be taking every single subject and asking how, you know, in a Catholic curriculum, what should the core knowledge in this subject pertaining to being a Catholic curriculum be? So whether it's key concepts in science, great Catholic scientists, how those concepts interact with faith. I mean, I'm sure this work is happening, but I think that's the bit that's so exciting about working in the Catholic sector. The whole curriculum, not just RE, although RE at the centre of it.
Rachel, thank you. Some of the things that you said there about the sort of age 3 upwards approach to teaching feeds into another couple of the questions that we've had here, one of which looks at the issue of curriculum, so maybe something for Paul or Bettina, about the change in the focus on scripture at Key Stage 4 because of the emphasis of learning on other major religions. Is that having an impact on the depth and breadth of our theological understanding in RE? Let's go to Paul with that one first, and then Bettina might want to add something there.
So the context of this is the recent reforms to the GCSEs, including the religious education GCSE. And we were very involved in that, and while we didn't get absolutely everything we wanted out of it, actually what we got was, I think, we were very pleased with the outcome, and it's certainly, we think, a huge improvement on what went before, although for various reasons that wouldn't necessarily have been hard, but we think it's actually a very good destination that we've reached. And it has reignited, I think, a passion amongst many RE teachers. And we've had some fabulous conversations during the reform process, but that's continued afterwards. Out of it has come the Association of Teachers of Catholic Religious Education, which had its first conference at St Mary's earlier in the year, fortunately before lockdown, so it was a real live event. And part of the requirements for the new GCSE is that 25% of the study has to be of another religion. So our bishops have recommended that in Catholic schools that the main religion is obviously Catholic Christianity, and that the second religion, the 25%, is Judaism. And what we've done is worked very closely with the Jewish community to come up with resources and training for teachers, and that has been in itself a hugely exciting journey. And I don't think in any way that that's diminished the theological content of the GCSE. I think it's actually done the opposite, because it's been able to enable us to focus on the key stage, the roots of our faith in the Jewish faith. And so it's being able to pull together all sorts of things. The challenge for us is, of course, ideally you change the curriculum from starting at the beginning and working upwards. What we've done is we've got a reform of Key Stage 4, and we've got to kind of do the rest of the refit backwards, as it were. So that's a challenge, but it's a challenge which, as I said, the RE staff in our schools have really risen to. And I you know, when I talk to them, there's a huge sense of excitement about the developments and the challenge that enables them to give the pupils, and the enthusiasm which that then engenders in the pupils who really now think this is a fabulous subject.
Paul, thank you. Bettina, a question's coming here which is related, and I'm sure you can join this question to anything you might want to add to what Paul has said. What hopes, and you've spoken a little bit about this before, but what hopes do you have for the revision of RE? What would be your aspirations as in that work that Paul has just been talking about of revising slightly back to front?
Well, yeah, merging the two together. I mean, Paul have spoken about Key Stage 4, and I mean, I myself as an RE teacher, with the initial reforms, I mean, we were all up in the air. We were so used to the old syllabus. You know, you could have taught it from the palm of your hands. You didn't need to pick a book up to teach it. And, you know, these reforms just throw everyone into chaos. But from a theological perspective, I think that really there's a lot of exciting things we can do. Remember, religious education in our schools is not just a subject, is it? It's the religious education of the church. And with the reforms, it has enabled us to do much more, particularly from Christianity. We're looking at the teachings of Christianity. We now we've got a 25% looking at the beliefs and practice of Judaism, the foundation of our religion. And we didn't have this opportunity to do this before. So yes, I initially, yes, I was reservations about the reforms, but now I think we are in an exciting position. We're in an exciting phase. However, in relation to lower down the school, as Rachel said earlier, and whoever the colleague is asking the question, my concerns for lower down the school is that the Key Stage 3 curriculum is getting narrower and narrower. I mean, I stood in my classes subsequent to the lockdown and going back to school 2 weeks ago, and Year 9 came in, and I stood there, and I don't know about all the teachers in the audience tonight, but I looked at Year 9 and I thought, whoa, we've got to get you through this. And I started off teaching not religious education, but I've started off looking at the Key Stage 4 syllabus. I've began Year 9 talking to them about the GCSE exams. And the exam question says, and the examiners would expect, and that is the end of Key Stage 3. That is the end of their religious education. And that is my concern for the future, that our students would not be able to enjoy the awe, the wonder that our subject is supposed to be, for them to develop that love, that question, that passion that I spoke about earlier. So as leaders of the subject area, as leaders of the Catholic community, we have to stop and to think of ways in which we can ensure that although the subject is academic, we also give some time for our students to continue to develop the awe and wonder of religious education as we pass on the faith of the church.
Tina, thank you. Obviously, St Mary's University has been deeply engaged in the work of curriculum revision, working with the CES and NIBRIA, and I know a lot of people are very grateful to the work of Auntie Terry and others in the Aquinas Centre at the university for the huge contribution they've made to that. But picking up on something that you said there, Bettina, about the sort of enthusiasm for the subject, I'm going to turn to Rachel here. We've had this question has come in an age of students becoming increasingly disconnected from religious education. I'm sure, you know, we have a very secular world that Paul has spoken about. How do we strive to show its importance and instill the passion for the subject? It'd be interesting to hear from you from that, given the schools in which you're working.
I mean, I suppose I'm quite optimistic about this. I wouldn't take. I think high quality, rigorous teaching that's really well sequenced. So we make sense of what we're teaching. If we put together our primary humanities curricula and our secondary curricula, and we make sure we've thought about the sequencing of which books in literature we're teaching, with what we're teaching in RE, with what we're teaching in history, not only do we increase children's vocabulary and therefore their sense of empowerment and their excitement about what they're learning, and they become proficient, and they, I think we don't need to try gimmicks. We need to teach really well and with great depth and thought, and we need to help pupils make the connections and learn about their world. They then become more proficient learners and better users of language, but they understand the world better, and we find they run to it. So I mean that look, you're teaching the stories of Jesus at Easter. I mean, it's absolutely. I watch classicals of children who are coming to that for the first time at 7 or 8 or 9 years old, because they come from a secular background, and they are absolutely riveted, and they can make connections between what they're learning in history, and they suddenly realize why certain wars have been fought, or why there's discontent there, or the history curriculum makes sense. And so I think it's about helping them, about not dumbing down and going for depth and going for rigor and expecting more of children, and actually that will create a real desire to learn. And it does. Just because you've been bereft of any religious upbringing at all, I think it's like Anthony said, when you come to it for the first time, then suddenly the lights go on and the questions come. So I would say, don't dumb down, stay, keep rigorous, show things really as they are. And actually, by building the hermeneutic, by building the whole framework and sequencing your curriculum properly and across the whole curriculum. Come on, when we're studying, when we're teaching our 9-year-olds about Easter, and they're reading the stories of Jesus, and you can show them the great art of the Catholic world, and they can engage with the pictures and the beauty, and 7-year-olds can do that, and even ones from secular backgrounds. If we get them young and start doing and do it properly, we don't have a problem, do we?
Rachel, thank you very much. We'll just have a change of tack for them. We'll come back to some of those issues in a little bit. But a question has come in here, which I think is probably best addressed by Paul, which is a recognition that academy trusts provide great strengths. But perhaps we'll start with Paul anyway, to comment on the suggestion that academies have put a new structure between the bishop and the school, and what impact that might have, and the kind of effect of a new, slightly different operational focus. Paul, could you comment on that? And then I think we'll go right round the panelists on this one.
So I think that the first thing I'd say, and this is partly with my lawyer's hat on, is that structures are structures. They have no inherent, they're there to do to fulfill a purpose. They have no inherent, there's no inherently good or bad structures, and we have a choice of different structures within the education system, and it's wider now with academies as part of that mixture. Now there have been a lot of different dioceses do different things, and different things are right for different times and different places. There has been concern that moving towards academies, you would lose something of the current structures of voluntary aided schools. And there's certainly a danger of that. and that's the going from a small organisation to a large one. Is it going to get too impersonal? Are we going to lose some of the magic, if you like, of what goes on in many of our schools? And we have to be alive to that. There's equally this concern that's expressed in the question, which is, can it be done in such a way that it doesn't impose that additional barrier? And I think the experience we've had, and let's be realistic, academies are still very new, and we are all learning, and we have learnt lessons in the different ways in which it's been implemented. But what we've also seen is where it's being implemented well, it doesn't create that barrier. In fact, it does the opposite. It allows dioceses to be more involved with the running of their schools than they would be if they had lots and lots and lots of separate schools. And as I mentioned in my introduction, some of the experiences coming from the lockdown and the pandemic were that there was a capacity in the larger multi-academy trusts that were well established to assist the diocese, to be closer to the diocese and closer to the schools, and to provide a backup for the schools, to provide an organisation and cope with some of the difficulties that smaller schools struggled with on their own, and to free the teaching staff to be professionals. And just linking into one other question there, on the questions that have been asked, it also creates jobs, educational jobs, that didn't exist at all 5 or 10 years ago. So somebody asked a question about RE coordinators who have gone as far as they can, there's no prospect of promotion, etc., etc. Well, actually, if you have multi-academy trusts, for example, you can have a curriculum 3 to 19 across the multi-academy trust. You can then have somebody whose job it is as an education professional, without necessarily wanting to go into leadership, because that may not be where their skills lie. You could be, to take religious education as the obvious example, you could be designing a religious education, a holistic religious education curriculum, 3 to 19 across a huge number of Catholic schools, and do that within the context of the Catholic curriculum that's been talked about, so that the Catholic RE does what our inspirational documents, Catholic teaching documents about education say it should, which is to not only be the core of the core curriculum, but be the beating heart of the curriculum, affecting every single subject on the rest of the curriculum.
Paul, thank you. That's something that Rachel spoke about earlier on. Rachel, would you like to add anything to Paul's reflection there?
Yeah, so I think Paul's absolutely right that a multi-academy structure is just a legal structure. But the one thing it allows us to do is to create, one thing we have to do as multi-academy trusts is create a genuine vision and strategy for the trust, for the group of schools that is led by a board. And I think as long as that board is reflective of the community and of the bishop, you have and liaises, you can be even closer. And I think because you organise then your own ethos, your own, and that can go right across the school, the way you're going to do services, as Paul said, the way you're going to do curriculum, and you can grow people through it. I think you have the chance to create a genuinely supportive group of schools that can look after all its schools. When I mentioned that small primary school, I did so on purpose. I've got dear friends who are executive. I think of Michael Merrick, who's an executive principal of 2 tiny primary schools up in Carlisle. And, I look at the financial, they haven't gone into multi-academy trust. I look at what he's had to do during the pandemic in terms of all the things. In my trust, I've got lots of people to do, sorting the food bags, feeding the children, making sure the IT's perfect, delivering the laptops. One guy, he's there, he has to do the whole lot. So I think a trust done well can create a true Catholic vision. The bishop can be, if the bishop can either put people on the board or be close to the board himself. As Paul said, you can focus on, the educationalists can focus on the things that matter, the curriculum, behaviour, ethos, culture, developing the formation of the pupils. And the multi-academy trust can take care of fixing the hole in the roof, feeding the children, doing all of that stuff.
Rachel, thank you. Bettina, anything you want to add there?
Not very much. I mean, academies is not, it's not a part of my expertise or so. However, what I would say is that my school community is a federation of schools. We've got a boys' school, a girls' school, and a sixth form, and they're separate. They have separate DFE numbers, etc. What I would say is that regardless of whether it's a multi-academy structure or whether it's a single school, if it's a Catholic school community, there's a vision, and it's based on who we are, the identity. All the various documents, as Paul mentioned earlier, has set that out very clear. And at the heart of any Catholic school community should be Christ at the center. Mm. It's down to the leader of that school community to share that vision and making it absolutely clear to the members of staff and colleagues across the multi-academy structure of what the importance and the purpose of the school is and what is it for. I think if that vision is shared sufficiently well, that vision will be then adapted and taken on board by the staff and be able to share that with the students in their care. So I think regardless of whether it's a multi-academy structure, it doesn't actually matter because the tenets of Catholic education is Christ at the center.
Tina, thank you. I'm going to come to Anthony now with a question that's, that we have here. You spoke, Anthony, about the relatively low numbers of committed Catholics in university, in terms of the whole student body. Do you see this then as a recall to focus on mission, and for that to impact on the people that a university might employ, or the development perhaps of a core curriculum that focuses on formation and education of students?
I think that the relatively low number of practicing Catholics is a call to mission for the whole church, actually, and certainly. So, I mean, I think there's probably almost a truism now to say, we are a missionary church. We're a missionary church in countries that historically had very high levels of adherence to Christianity generally. So I think there's a missionary challenge. So understanding the task in missionary terms, I think, is essential. I think it's a really interesting question in terms of the intake of students, because this would be true of any. And I've been chair of governors at another church university. I'm now vice chancellor of St Mary's. In both cases, it would be true to say that many of the students who come to the university are not coming there because of that church identity. And that's, if you survey students, they'll tell you why they've come. There'll be a whole variety of reasons. Some of them will. What I think is really important for a Catholic university is that, first of all, that it has a very clear sense of its Catholic identity. And that identity is expressed confidently and visibly. And certainly, I see it almost as concentric circles. It must be there for those students who have come to the university because they want to live an integrated life of higher education study and the practice of their faith. So it goes without saying. And I think, that's absolutely essential in terms of the provision of chapel, of chaplaincy, of sacraments, etc. There's then a next circle, which will be those who, without being committed, want to explore and want to search further. And again, one of the things that we're thinking about here very actively at the moment at St Mary's is how does chaplaincy function for them as well? And I think that's a really, I've referred to the discussion with our colleagues in Paris about that. I think that's a really important part of the function of the university. So it's there for those, it's there visibly, and you can find it and you can engage with it no matter where you are personally in terms of your own faith journey. I think that in terms of curriculum, I think that's a really interesting one. I mean, clearly there are strong elements of the curriculum which are undeniably and very recognizably drawing on the tradition of the church, but the wider legacy of the church to higher education, of course, is about a synthesis of knowledge, about the interdisciplinary links that could be formed. And so I think that in terms of curriculum, there is a task which we've already heard our colleagues who are working principally in schools talk about seeing how that vision affects all parts of the curriculum. I think that happens to some extent at the higher education level. I think that the very high degree of specialization that takes place in a way, our education system constantly gets more and more specialized, and universities certainly traditionally have been the epitome of that, with a very strong focus on a very narrow subject area. But there are possibilities for creating many more opportunities, I think, for students to engage with serious study which draws upon the legacy of the church, the intellectual tradition of the church, as part of their higher education study. And a Catholic university needs to provide opportunities to do that. We're at the moment going through some reorganization of our curriculum offering, and we are looking at the extent to which actually bringing together a broad approach to liberal arts with our approach to theology can create some good cross currents which reinforce each other. So work in progress, but very exciting work.
Anthony, thank you. You've spoken about the narrowing as education goes on. We've had a couple of questions have come in that take us to earlier days in education, especially for staff, for school staff. One here coming from a deputy head in a Catholic school in South Wales, involved in induction, and speaks about the having a critical level of staff passionate about the gospel and having Christ at the centre. And I'd like to that leads on to a question that has come in, which is how do we approach fostering having Christ at the centre with new staff? Bettina, you start us off on that one, if you would, please.
Okay, I'll try to answer that. As I said, I teach in a very large school in the East End of London. And it's extremely culturally diverse. The percentage of Catholic school teachers is less than the percentage of non-Catholic teachers, for example. And I mean, all our teachers, of course, is something that if they're listening tonight, they often hear me say at the beginning of every academic year, is that you are teachers of Catholic education. Now, when a teacher decides to work in a Catholic school community, I often say, you have signed up to become a teacher of Catholic education. And everyone is welcome in our school community. But what do we do as a school community to ensure that not only that they're welcome, but that they understand the tenets of the school community? Each year within our school community, at the beginning of the year, we have a guest speaker. And it's always a speaker who speaks to the school community about, reminds us of what it means to work in Catholic education. What are the expectations? And we believe that in doing so, it reminds Catholic teachers themselves, it reminds Christian teachers, Muslim teachers, any teacher of any faith or no faith at all, it reminds them of their responsibility within the school community. It's not just for the teachers. Something that we often do is try to ensure that all staff members, whether it's the ground staff, the kitchen staff, the administrative staff, all members of the school community is present at these talks. We also throughout the year run sessions that would be inclusive of the needs of the various members of staff in our school community. We run sessions like mini inset, Friday morning insets, looking at how to lead prayer with your form groups, how to lead prayer with your tutor groups. We do carousels where at different points in the year, at least 3 times a year, where we again look at the various things within the school community that a non-Catholic would not know what to do. We also have vibrant chaplaincies, and I mean, I know it's difficult to find good chaplains or to find a chaplain who will be able to carry out the role. I mean, we now have so many lay chaplains rather than religious chaplains, and they do a wonderful, wonderful job. Find yourself a good chaplain who can help you and to support and help you to lead that work. And I mean, they're invaluable when you find a good chaplain. So if you find one, hold on to them. But your head teachers also are extremely important. Your head teachers, who of course is the leader of the faith within the community, and they have to, you know, give the opportunities, ensure the opportunities are there, whether it's to do research, whether it's to do master's course, whether it's to, but the head teacher has an awful responsibility to help and to guide this. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, thank you, Bettina, for that. You've mentioned chaplaincy there, and we've had a couple of questions come in which are kind of related to this. One is an observation that religious orders, and Rachel's mentioned the place of religious in your own education in the past, earlier on this evening, with religious orders no longer leading or running most of our schools, they still have a very valuable network and places for spiritual development. What's the place, you know, how can we work with our schools and the religious orders that we have to get those two together? And then another question has come in here about facilitating opportunities for transformation in faith, not just through RE, but pilgrimages, retreats, and chaplaincy is very much a part of that. And somebody has also asked a question about the place of the priest in the school these days, and how we can perhaps be a bit more agile in enabling priests to come into schools, celebrate masses, to provide the sacrament of reconciliation, to be a priestly presence in the school. Now, so there's quite a lot there. I've tried to join those three together a bit. So we'll go to Paul first, because I'm conscious that the CS has been doing some work looking at chaplaincy provision in recent times. So Paul, start us off on some of those issues, would you?
Yeah, I'll start, I think, with addressing some of the religious orders, the questions relating to religious orders. I mentioned earlier that one of our challenges is, in a sense, the disappearance of religious orders. In the 1930s, about 50% of our schools were run by religious orders. It's now about 5%. And that's a combination of the orders numbers dwindling and them transferring schools to dioceses, but also the big expansion of secondary education, which was largely diocesan after the 1930s. But the religious orders not only still do a fantastic job today within our system, but they created the infrastructure and the basis for much of our system, and that legacy continues. And we're working very closely with the religious orders, and over the last few years we've been talking to them about these issues and how we capture that story and retell it and make it better known in the Catholic community, because it needs to be better known than it is at the moment, but also how we tap into their resources to assist the whole system as well as their own schools to go forward. And out of some of those conversations, the religious have created a new body, the Religious Orders in Education, and they are continuing to work with us on many of these issues. In terms of chaplaincy, chaplaincy is, of course, absolutely central to the identity of our Catholic schools. It differs in its nature in primary and secondary. And chaplaincy is wider than just priests in schools. There are many, many lay chaplains, and a lot of work's been done, particularly by the Association of Catholic Chaplains in Education, on how that can be very much central to part of the central part of the identity of our schools. So the question of trying to get priests in is part of that, but it is much wider.
Well, thank you. Rachel, you spoke with some fervour about the Society of Jesus at Heathrop and about the sisters, the presentation sisters in your own education journey. Would you like to add anything to what Paul has said there?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly, I mean, I was educated in the 70s and 80s, and there were still, very thriving numbers of religious orders in schools, and I was very, very fortunate to have experienced the impact of that. I think we need to do some really imaginative and ambitious thinking about how to engage these brilliant men and women in religious orders with the visions of the new trusts that have been set up. I'm quite close. I work quite closely with St. Ignatius, the head teacher at St. Ignatius, and the Jesuit schools, and know quite a few of the Jesuits who are involved. And I'm constantly exhorting them to, so refresh the vision, become taught to Westwood, to become a multi-academy trust. You've got a fantastic Jesuit vision. You might not be able to teach, but you could govern. You could be on the boards. You could actually do so much in terms of training and development of teachers who are connected to you, and open Stonyhurst, open these places, train, get your teachers there, train them. So I think, I mean, that's just the Jesuits, and I do bother them a lot, but they deserve it because they educated me. But there's so much there, and the impact could be huge. And I think we should be calling them on it and saying, we need you. And this new trust model, if that's the way we're going, could provide a fabulous opportunity to refresh sharing those wonderful charisms of religious orders. I mean, I cut me down the middle, and you'll find Teresa of Avila and St. Ignatius Loyola, because I grew up with them, from the religious that shared them, and how unless you grow up with it in your ethos and your vision, you're not going to have it in the same way. So I think, even though numbers may be lower, I don't think the Jesuits or anyone else should be allowed to duck this. And I know you had Father Provincial on earlier, was here earlier on education, and you should have let me interview him, because I would definitely have been challenging him on how he can set the world on fire, as his founder did, for education, and as they did after, when Catholicism was, in 1800s, when we were allowed back, and and as our schools came, look at what the Jesuits did then. We need that now. So I give challenge to them and to the religious orders to think differently, use this approach with boards, bringing schools together to get engaged and get the ethos going. It doesn't need you to teach. It doesn't need everyone to teach. We can do it in different ways, and somehow we have to make this happen, because that plurality, that diversity of Catholic expression, and what that, especially those teaching orders, what their experience and knowledge. I meet people in secular education all the time from Catholic backgrounds who've been inspired by that. So we need them back.
Thank you, Rachel, very much indeed. Some of the things that you were talking about there, both yourself and Paul, about the role of our religious orders in leadership. So I'm going to ask Bettina now, and then I'm going to ask Anthony as well. What is the most important feature of Catholic leadership? The most important feature, just one. What would you put at the top of the list? Bettina.
Someone who lives the gospel. Lives the gospel, the visibility of the gospel, and how they pass that gospel on in their daily lives to their staff and to students.
Thank you. Anthony.
I would have to say, service. Service, for you as an individual, and then service for your Catholic institution, for the church, and then the church for the world. It's always about service for something else, if that makes sense. So I think that that kind of very deep concept of service is really, really important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got one or two rather specific questions have come in too. How much of a siren, maybe Paul can start us off here, how much of a siren is the proposed legislative changes to RE schools in Wales? And do those changes echo points made by Paul and Bettina about narrowing of curriculum? Paul, start us off there, would you?
So there's a current, the Welsh Government are reforming the curriculum in Welsh schools. And there's currently a bill before the Senate to implement that. And that has huge challenges for the Catholic sector in Wales at the moment, as it's currently drafted. It's an integrated curriculum with areas of learner experience, and religious education fits within the humanities area of learner experience. But it's supposed to be, in a sense, a curriculum without subject boundaries. The recent consultation outcome was that they are going to change the name of religious education to religion, values and ethics, and the significant protections which we have in current legislation for the integrity of denominational education will be removed. And the other part of it, which is causing a huge challenge, is that the right of withdrawal from religious education and from relationship and sexuality education, as they're going to call it, will also be removed in Wales from parents. And that causes all sorts of problems. And Catholic schools will, if the bill goes through in its current form, be obliged to prepare 2 religious education curricula, one, the Catholic RE, and a parallel curriculum teaching in accordance with the agreed syllabus in the local authority area, potentially putting a huge burden on our schools, which they haven't got the resources to fulfil. So it's a real challenge. And if anyone here listening is from Wales, please get onto the government website and respond to the consultations and make your views known, because we really need as many people as possible to make their views known, and write to your MS and tell them of your concerns as well, because we need to we are working very hard with the government and with the parliamentarians to see if we can make some changes to what's currently proposed.
Paul, thank you very much for that and for the call to those taking part in this event. Bettina, just thinking of that narrowing of curriculum piece, is there anything you'd like to say on that?
Not much more, nothing to really add to what Paul has said in relation to the question from Wales, Bishop. Nothing
Right.
really.
Thank you very much indeed. Something for the universities, Anthony, here. In what way do you think a Catholic university can work collaboratively? I know we do, some areas we do work collaboratively with schools, so perhaps we could say more collaboratively with schools in ongoing curriculum reform, not just in RE, but in all areas. Would you like to comment on that, Anthony?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying about the, part of the service that the Catholic University can provide to the wider church community is that it is, or if it's a good university, it should be functioning at the frontiers of knowledge and the development of knowledge and the transmission of knowledge, and therefore it is there as a resource to work with curriculum development at school level, as well as, of course, at the university itself. I mean, that's obviously and demonstrably the case in those subjects where there's a really sort of umbilical connection, like teacher education. And I can't go without mentioning, of course, developments like well-established developments at St Mary's, like the MA in Catholic School Leadership. Really direct resources which schools can draw upon. But the wider process of curriculum development and knowledge development is exactly what the key task of the university any university, and certainly a Catholic university, is. So I think that increasingly the whole Catholic educational community getting used to the idea that there are Catholic universities, that those Catholic universities are there to serve their needs, and in fact almost encouraging the rest of the Catholic educational community to become quite demanding of Catholic universities. And Catholic universities are a recent phenomenon in the modern period in this country, we have to remember. I mean, most of us, went to university at a time where there simply weren't Catholic universities. There might have been Catholic colleges of higher education, Catholic teaching colleges, but there weren't Catholic universities. Now there are. We're small in number, we're small in size, but we're there. And I think it's about making sure that as the entire Catholic educational community, we think about the place of the universities, what the universities can do. I mean, what was so wonderful about the big assembly 10 years ago, which we're remembering today, was the fact that St Mary's acted as a hub for this enormous gathering of thousands of school students from across the country. And, an event like that happens by very definition very occasionally. But the university as a centre for, we're having some discussions at the moment about the way in which, for instance, our very splendid and large chapel here at St Mary's can be a focus for school activities, bringing schools onto campus, providing a wonderful setting for school events on campus. So I think there are a whole range of ways in which it's very natural for a Catholic university to act as a hub for activities which then support the development of learning and curriculum within schools.
Anthony, thank you. We've while we have you there, and you've spoken about the number of Catholic universities, the small number that we have. Could you say something perhaps about the possibilities on collaboration across those universities to support Catholic education at primary and secondary level?
Well, I think that, there's a very clear indication in the document I referred to earlier from St John Paul II, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, which makes it very clear that there is an expectation that Catholic universities will work together. So I think that gives an impetus to the Catholic universities here to try to do so. But of course, it's in the essence of being Catholic that the outlook is universal. And in fact, many of the partnerships that St Mary's has fostered in recent years have been international, because it's very natural for us to talk, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, to our colleagues in Paris, and indeed to have joint academic programs with our colleagues in Paris. We're on the verge of signing an agreement with the Australian University, where my distinguished predecessor, Francis Campbell, is now Vice-Chancellor, Notre Dame in Australia. We have a number of relationships with institutions in the US. We have a number of relationships with institutions in South America. So, absolutely collaborating within England and within the UK. But I think that we also have that vision about working more broadly and working internationally, and the networks that the church provides open up, I think, channels for dialogue that might not otherwise, naturally be there. And so there's something very important there for Catholic universities internationally.
Anthony, thank you very much. I'm being reminded by the technical team that time is marching on. But there's one question that's come in, which is very important for us at this present moment in our history. It doesn't relate to COVID, but rather to the Black Lives Matter agenda. How does the panel think the Catholic education institutions should respond to the challenges raised by Black Lives Matter? Rachel.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's absolutely critical that we as certainly as Catholic educators, we address any of these issues around, and particularly the issue of race equality, and where there might be racism, or where there might be issues there. So I think the Black Lives Matters protests have brought that to the fore. Now, I think that's a start, but we need to go much further. We need to make sure that the literature that we're teaching, much of the great literature of history, but also includes the literature of voices that haven't been included. And we can do that in so many excellent ways. We can do that in geography. We can do that in the great places that we're looking at. In RE, are we sure that we've been really representative about what we're teaching? The saints that we're showing children, are they from the broader community, from the Black community? So there's so much we can do in our curriculum that goes further than just the obvious facing and addressing racism in terms of very overt racism. We need to look right through our curriculum and know and acknowledge that a high quality curriculum is a diverse one, and one that can really show the achievements, the contributions right throughout history of the whole broad Catholic family, and make sure that it has Black voices and that it has, all of our Catholic community. Fortunately, Catholicism is universal, and we are so well placed to do that, and we can do that in our visual images, in our churches, I was thinking of St. Augustine. I can, the first look at St. Augustine and think, yeah, he's African. He's our greatest, one of our greatest thinkers. And there's so many ways we can do this. I'm sorry if I garbled a bit, but the passion is there.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask Bettina if she'd like to add, and then to Paul if there's anything from the national perspective on this. And then we have one more question.
Well, just to add into what Rachel has said, talking about St. Augustine, we got Martin de Porres, St. Martin de Porres, another saint that could be visible in our school communities. And it's just encapsulating what Rachel has said, because we've been doing this. We've always done this. This is nothing new to Catholic school communities. We teach this, we live this. And here is another opportunity for us to be out in front and actually doing something about this. Our curriculum, looking at the curriculum offer again in history, in RE, in geography, in all the subject areas across the curriculum. Head teachers have to be creative and imaginative at this point, and to ensure that their school communities' voices are heard. I teach in the East End of London, as I said earlier. I have a very diverse school community, but there's an awful lot of Black children and ethnic minority children in our school communities up and down this country. Let their voices be heard. Let them know that they're important, because they are. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 should be the center of our school community at the moment. Year 7s and year 8s, they are created Imago Dei, and which means they have got a voice. Bettina, and they're no different than anybody of any other color. Pardon?
Your voice for a minute. You froze slightly there. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, don't worry.
One of the things my own school community do on an annual basis, I don't know how we're going to do it this year going on Zoom, is we celebrate, like the rest of the world, Black History Month. This is an opportunity to celebrate who they are. Get them writing. During the lockdown season, when this all happened with George Floyd, my school community went online, and we actually had an entire week of prayer and reflection on the Black Lives Matter issue. This is something that schools can do, So at the moment, what I think schools need to be imaginative. They really need to be, because we have got a platform to be able to clearly highlight that every child is created in God's image and likeness. And as a result of that, their voices should be heard, and they should never, ever be discriminated against.
Paul, would you like to add anything to this just from your national overview of things?
I don't think there's very much I can add. Certainly the universality of the church feeding into, and the diversity of our schools feeding into a design of a curriculum that is truly universal and Catholic is key to this. And everything the previous two speakers have said about it is right. And there's some fantastic stuff going on in our schools and in our dioceses across the country. I mean, for example, the statement of Archbishop John Wilson in Southwark and many others like it. So that's all I'd add.
Thank you. We have one last question, which is for Rachel. And it's the person with the question has addressed it specifically to you. What advice do you have, Rachel, for an aspiring Catholic head teacher?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I would say, first of all, go for it. We need you. So keep that ambition. Don't be put off. I would say find great support and mentors. I'd be phoning Paul Barber up straight away and telling him that you want to do this, and asking him to keep you in mind and make sure your training is there. I would choose carefully. When you choose to lead a school, you're leading a community, you're changing the lives potentially of a generation of students and young people. So I would say choose your school carefully. I would say you're going to need to learn when you get that job to be able to manage the huge workload and stress and responsibility. So you need to know where you find your strength, your relaxation, your nurture, and you need to make sure that's, for me, it's my family. For me, it's those quiet moments in Spanish Place where I can sit and reflect and have a moment. So you need to find those things. But the most important thing, and also I would say, don't lose the curriculum, don't lose teaching. Head teaching does not have to be a managerial distance job. You need to be the lead teacher, the leader of the curriculum, and keep your passion for the very things that took you there, which is, managing the behavior of children, the ethos of the school, supporting your teachers, keeping a passion for the curriculum. And just remember, it's a generation of children and it's a whole community. It's the most important job. I do think it's probably the most important job in education. So go for it.
Rachel, thank you. Go for it is a wonderful line on which to end. Can I just, first of all, thank our panelists, to Anthony, Bettina, Rachel, Paul, for being with us and presenting to us and answering questions, to those in the background who've helped all this to go through so smoothly, and to thank all those who've taken part during the course of this evening, all those who submitted questions. We didn't quite get to all of them, but I think it's really is a time now that we need to end. So it's been a wonderful day for St Mary's, remembering Pope Benedict's visit. And thanks to everyone who's taken part in this evening's event for being part of today's celebration. Bless you now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.